Miss Cochran was the principal of our Sunset Gap School, and also she taught. She taught many subjects. She was a very intelligent lady and very, very strict. And she had to be like a strict sergeant because we had some wild boys in that class and a few girls same way. But she would not put up with any foolishness. And when she sent you home, you were in trouble. Because the parents in those days would discipline their children, so when they went back to school, they didn't pull that trick again. But Miss Cochran, when she come in, you'd be seated after you said the Pledge of Allegiance and your song, military songs, like the caisson to go rolling. We did one for each branch of service, not every day, but occasionally. And we saluted the flag every day. And she had a prayer every day, and then she gave you a cod liver oil spoon every day. If you didn't take it, that was your fault. I took it, and it didn't bother me. But she seemed to have a few favorites in class, but she didn't portray that at all. Her students were all treated alike. And I learned a lot from Miss Cochran, and I appreciated it. And I liked her, but some people did not, and some of the parents did not, because she was so strict with her children. And she'd send them home, and the parents would get upset, but she didn't mind. That was her job, and she did it. And she was there the entire time I was there. And when my mother died, she taught me a lot of feminine cleanliness that I knew nothing about, and I'm sure a lot of the girls didn't. And she taught us how to clean house, how to dust, and clean up our school desk. We had to keep that clean. You didn't write on it, you cleaned it up. And you didn't carve on it. If she caught you, you were in trouble. But I appreciated her because you knew what you went to school for. You didn't go to play. You went to learn and follow her rules, and you did it or else. She'd whack you with a ruler or otherwise. And I did get hit one time for being a smart, excuse the language. But she did whack me across the hand one time with a ruler. I was talking back to her. You don't do that. And the boys did it. She put them out of the classroom immediately. I don't care if it was raining, snowing, or whatever. You did what she said. She had to. She was the woman in charge. Came there as a missionary, and I know nothing about her mission work, but that's what my grandmother started doing with her, was mission work, and that's how they got interested in building the school there.
When the building burnt, I was with the Collegeville Volunteer Fire Department, and I come up here, but it was already engulfed in flames, and there wasn't nothing we could do but just keep it from spreading. That was 20 years ago, I guess, somewhere like that. But that's the one time I was up here. But other than that, the only times that I'd come up here would be with my mom when she'd come to the store out there. But that's about it. That's about all we've done.
One of the activities we had at Sunset Gap was Community Day, and that would be a time when we would take a van and go pick up all the kids in the area, probably within 10 miles or so, and bring them back to do activities. But I would ride with them when they would go home. And so as we were driving down Wilhite Road into Sevier County from Sunset Gap, about 3 to 4 miles away, we were on this old gravel road, and I noticed this thing walking on the side of the road on the right side, and it had a yoke on its shoulders, and on each side of the yoke were pails. And as we got closer, and again we're driving in a van, as we got closer I could see he had a hat on, but when we passed him he had a snout and a big beard, and it looked like he had hooves. And so I wasn't sure exactly what that was. Normally people wear boots or tennis shoes or something like that, but this fella had hooves. So it's the first time I'd ever seen that. So I'll remember it forever, probably. But so you see certain things as you're growing up that you don't understand, but that's okay.
As I said earlier, I had a fairly unusual upbringing by what would be considered normal American standards, and I still do have a lot of time to help out at Sunset Gap today. Now, part of it is just going down there, helping with a couple things, usually on Wednesdays, but sometimes we'll be called to help get donations from one place, load it up, drive it back to Sunset Gap so it could be sold in a thrift shop, at an auction, and so forth. This one particular day was on the hot afternoon of Tuesday, April the 4th, 2023. There was a lady whose mother lived in Newport, and we, my mom, myself, my two brothers, took a minivan and a pickup truck, but we probably should have taken a trailer too, because she had a lot of things in her home to be unloaded, and it took a long time. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, the first thing we did when we get there, we took most of the stuff out of the house and just set it on the ground along the pathway so we could load it up into the vehicles later. That wasn't so bad. You had a couple heavy things now and then, but it wasn't so bad. There was 4 of us. But inside the house was warmer than outside. The lady's mother was quite old and she wanted to stay warm. It makes sense, but it didn't make it much easier on us. But the very, very last thing we had to lug out of that house was a very large TV cabinet. And it wasn't like you would expect it to be in the living room where you could just get right out the front door. It was in one of the bedrooms down the hallway. It was very, very difficult to maneuver it out that doorway, down the hallway, then out the front door, and then get it from near the door down, then get it into the vehicle. It probably took 30 minutes to an hour just to get that one TV cabinet out. It was not an easy thing to do. But the story doesn't end there. When we got to Sunset Gap, fortunately there was a work camp group that helped us unload all the stuff. Unfortunately, that TV cabinet broke, so all of that work was for naught. And of course, what we'd do is we'd take some of the donations, and some of it we'd put in different places. Some of it would be the auditorium, etc. And some of the members of the work camp group, they were playing on the piano that they had in the auditorium. And when we finished unloading everything, I noticed they weren't there anymore, so I figured I might as well play it. Nobody's around, so I might as well just relax for a few minutes. And for reference, I was not extremely good at the piano back then, but I have been playing for a very, very long time. Took lessons when I was a child, but after one point we stopped taking lessons. I don't remember why. My teacher has since retired since then. But a couple years ago I started getting back into it again, and the time of this recording of the instruments I can play that I would not consider to be gimmicks or novelties would be the piano, the melodica, the accordion, the dulcimer, and the Irish whistle, and counting. So I was just sitting there playing the song, and I believe it was Morrison's Jig. It's an Irish song. Of course, it's a jig. It's a dance song. So some of the girls that were helping us unload the vehicles, they started coming in there and prancing around like, "You want me to stop?" "Oh, that's fine. You can keep going." So I played, and they had their fun and everything as far as that's concerned. And I played some more songs, and they sang to some of them, they danced to others. One of them even started beatboxing to Amazing Grace. then a little bit later on, one of the ladies from that work camp group said, "Oh, all right, girls, we've got something to do. We're going to move the ice machine out of the kitchen and take it away so they can get a new one." And I figured I might as well help out. So we went to the side door from the auditorium, and they had the van pulled up and the hatch was open. The problem is, on that deck, the ice machine was too tall for them to get it in there. So the idea was to pull the van forward so we could tilt it in there. So that's what we did. With a little trouble though. For some reason, after the van pulled forward, it suddenly started coming backwards again. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but after that lady got out of that vehicle, I looked her right in the eye and said, "We were this close from having to call 911, because one of the girls was just sitting there right back here waiting to load the ice machine, and the van almost hit her right in the legs." Whew. But the story doesn't end there either. After we got back into the auditorium from loading that old ice machine in, I played the piano a little bit more, but things were different. For some reason, those girls thought it would be kind of fun to ask me some questions. They started out fairly unusual, things like, "What do you prefer, hot dogs or hamburgers?" and just random questions like that. Later on, they started asking me questions about politics. At that point, I knew things had gone too far. They also asked me some questions that I pretended not to understand. They said things like, "What do you prefer, blondes or brunettes?" So I pretended to not understand their question by looking at my own hair color. I don't know if they fell for my acting job or not. I didn't have to answer their questions. I don't care. But ever since then, I have been very, very cautious about when I play the piano in that auditorium. But the story doesn't end there. About a year later, in 2024, my grandmother, Betty Williams, we wanted to have her deck redone. Some of the boards were getting old. And we said, maybe we get a work camp group to do it. So we contacted the director, Miss Audrey, and we got things to work out. But I was kind of suspicious about which group it might be. Now, the first work camp group that I mentioned of the girls interrogating me after the piano recital, that work camp group was from Michigan. And I don't remember how I found it out, but after I learned that this group that was going up and working on Nana's deck was also from Michigan, I got very, very suspicious. And she lives right up the hill from here, so what I did was I opened the bathroom window and listened, because she lives just up the hill from here. You can easily hear conversations going up on the driveway. And when one of those ladies told my mom, "Hey, I remember you," there was no way I was going up there. Now, thinking back on it now, I probably could have gone back up there with no trouble, because thinking back on it, the girls that were there at Sunset Gap in 2023 were alone, because probably the rest of the group was out working on a house, and this was the group that was working on a house, so the same individuals probably wouldn't be there. Of course, that didn't cross my mind at the time. And I don't mean to make it sound like it was too horrible of a thing. They were just trying to have fun. I just really didn't enjoy that experience. But they did do a good job on Nana's deck. And the intern at that time, Kylie, I told her about what happened, and she told me that the same work camp group broke the air hockey table in the foyer and didn't tell Miss Audrey about it. So I thought, yeah, that really doesn't surprise me too much. But I really can't say that much bad about it. That sounds like something I would do, especially when I was younger. So ever since then, I've been extremely cautious when I play the piano in the auditorium, and I've always looked for Michigan license plates on the vehicles. And I don't hate those girls for what happened that day. I just have personality conflicts with slap-happy high school girls. And they did some other things. They said, "Hey, what do you look like with your glasses on?" Because I had my glasses pinned to my shirt. And of course I'd put them on upside down like this. And the other times they would ask me how old I thought they were. And I was getting fairly spiteful, and so I would guess 2! Probably shouldn't have done that, but that's what happened anyway.
So my mom worked at Sunset Gap for many years, and a big part of that was cooking for the work camp groups that would come to do mission work in the area. And one of the things they asked of her was that she would talk for them. They liked her accent, they liked the way she said certain words. It wasn't a pretense with her, it was just the way she talked. And they weren't making fun of her, they really genuinely wanted to hear her talk. So part of that was they would ask her to tell them ghost stories. And there were several stories about Sunset Gap and ghosts and spirits and things like that. Now, I myself have never seen anything like that at Sunset Gap. I've never heard any strange noises. I'm not afraid to be in the buildings by myself. It never bothered me. I have slept in the old craft house before it burned down, and I was never afraid. But my dad did tell stories about some of the early teachers, how one of them was supposedly tormented by a ghost during the night, and they found her locked in her bathroom in the where she'd slept in the bathtub that night. And I don't remember if she resigned or not, but supposedly that spirit's name was Caleb. I don't know much about that, but I do know that my mom would tell stories about the caskets being underneath the stage in the auditorium. So the stage is a little bit above the level of the main floor, and there's a sort of a sliding trap door, and you could get a flashlight and look back in there and see what looked like empty wooden boxes. Now, I know that the craft house was used as a hospital and a TB clinic, and you would assume that some people did die there, which would lead credence to the stories about the ghosts and the stories about the caskets. So Mom would tell the work camp group and the summer staffers about these empty caskets underneath the floor. And I know my brother and Becky Davis looked under there one time, and that was kind of an interesting story. But we had our own experience. Danny Davis and I and a couple of the work camp group boys got a flashlight and looked under there, and we didn't see any boxes, we didn't see any caskets, but it was still a good story. She wasn't telling the stories to scare anybody, she was just entertaining them, and they were very entertained. And even after it was pretty much confirmed there weren't any caskets under there, she still kept telling the story to the subsequent groups, and they still enjoyed it. So interesting times for all of us, and you don't need to be afraid to go up there.
Piggybacking also on Betty's ghost story memories, she did. She was a very good storyteller, and the work camp groups loved hearing Betty stories. So the Betty story that I recall the very most is her ghost stories. And she talked about the coffins under the stage in the Sunset Gap Community Center. So Duran and I don't remember if there were anybody else. I don't know if Danny was there, or if Chrissy was there, or if Karen or Joni were there. But Duran and I remember he had the flashlight. And so we opened the door on the stage and looked under, and we could see a coffin. We could see probably a child-size coffin. And so we thought, how do we get to that? And neither one of us wanted to go down that hole from the stage. So we figured out that the best way to get to it was directly underneath, seemed to be like behind the kitchen. You would go in the kitchen, and then there was a hidden door, a door in the pantry that was behind an ice maker. And so we went through that door, and again, I don't remember if it was anybody but me and Duran, we went through the door and walked. It was an unfinished area back there, so it was like a hill of dirt, earth, and we walked as far as we could get, and we thought, okay, this has got to be the area where that box was. There was no box. Nothing was there. And so we thought about it, and my memory is that we had gone back up afterwards to the stage area and opened the door again and looked, and there wasn't a box that time. So we don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I haven't talked to Duran to know if he knows what happened or if he even remembers that. But that was another ghost story from the coffins under the stage. There's a second ghost story that goes along with that. But this one took place up in the craft house or the dormitory. The Girl Scouts were having a sleepover in the craft house, and there were about 3 of us that had gone on. We had been over at the center for whatever we were doing, and then the 3 of us decided to go on up the hill to the craft house and get our bedding ready and all. And so we went upstairs to the girls' side of the dorm and got our things all prepared for the evening, and none of the other girls had come yet. They weren't, they weren't there. But the 3 of us heard steps coming up the steps to our side of the dorm room, the girls' room. And we waited and waited and waited some more, and nobody came up those steps. But all 3 of us heard the steps. Somebody or something was coming up those steps. And I have yet to figure out how or what that was. My last ghost story involves the picture of a man. I don't know who he was, but there was a framed, 18 by 24 or 24 by 36 picture of this man over the foyer fireplace in the center. And it hung there for years. But whenever I would go in there alone, and Daddy's office was on the top floor just to the right, and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts were over top floor on the left, and preschool was back in the back left corner as you were facing the foyer. Anywhere a person would stand in the foyer, the eyes of that man would be looking directly at you. How that happened, I don't know. But to this day, I still don't like to go in the building by myself.
Before Sunset Gap had indoor bathroom, they had an outhouse a few feet from the back of the building, where is now the kitchen on that corner. In the late 1960s, we built the 2 bathrooms upstairs that used to be the cloakroom for when school was going on. Around 1995, we built the first bathroom downstairs because I was taking my cancer treatments and I was too weak to go upstairs. When the work camp groups would come, they would leave mementos there of what they had been doing all week, if it was vacation Bible school or working on somebody's house or around the building, and they'd put it on a plank or a board or something, and they used to hang them around all in the building, and when it got a lot hanging in it, they'd take the older ones down to put up new ones, and they'd stack them in the little shed out there, and some of them got lost like that, and then they got to putting them over in the dorm. And when the dorm burned, a lot of their mementos got burned in that. when Sunset Gap was first built, there was a concrete floor, and right in the middle of it had a trough that drained the water off from the back of the building, and it come all the way down through the middle and run out right in front. And people didn't know what it was there for, so they filled it up with concrete. And that has what's caused part of the water issues up there now. And when the school first started there, they gave them a dose of cod liver oil every day, and then they had to brush their teeth, and that's where they brushed their teeth, and they spit the stuff out of it down in that little trough, and it ran it all the way out down through there. The upstairs where the auditorium and the kitchen is was one big room, but it had folding doors to separate two rooms there, and then they decided to take the doors down and just make it all one big long room, and they were going to throw the door away, some of the doors away, and I saved one of them, and my son Duran cut it down and fixed it and made my granddaughter a headboard for her a bed. So we got a little piece of the center there.
Well, of course, all kind of, a lot of older people used to tell stories about haints, and goblins, and ghosts. And every little area had one. Usually every family had one, but not specifically about Sunset Gap, but the house that I grew up in, my great-uncle Gaith had built it. And it's just a 3-room house. It had a living room with a fireplace. It had a bedroom. And it had a kitchen, long kitchen. Didn't have hot water, didn't have a bathroom, but outside toilet. It did have electricity and cold water. But one of our relatives had a wife who had died in childbirth. And right after I was born, Mama got me home and Daddy was out working cutting pulpwood. And Mama said she would notice like a vision of a lady high up in the corner. And she had her arms crossed, she had long dark hair. And she was just staring at me and Mama. And she had a white ruffled top on, and it went to about mid-thigh. It was a purple skirt, and it just kind of blended to nothing. Mama said she never said nothing and never threatened, and Mama didn't do anything, sit there and rock me. But she'd ask about it later on, and I think that lady's name was Rachel. But she had died in childbirth and everything. And then somebody else said they saw that same dark-haired lady up on the hill at the cemetery above where I grew up, the Williams Cemetery. And they had the purple maroon dress and a white blouse. So I mean, of course, I was too little to realize it. But that's what Mama said. Still swears this day that happened. As far as Sunset Gap goes, yeah, Mama used to tell all kind of ghost stories about up there. People's told tales here. The big thing was the old craft house built in 1928. It was a TB clinic at one time. And I reckon there was 4 or 5 people that died in there. And Aunt Tootie especially, when she used to clean it in the late 80s and the 90s, she said she saw a spirit in there. And Missy, my wife, she said she always felt uncomfortable in there. And I went to Bulgaria in early 2000s when I was working on my doctorate with some grad students from UT Knoxville, and we hosted them back over here that next year. And I had them all come up. There was about 6 of them, and they stayed at the craft house that night. And I was telling them some of those stories. That next day, that one of those professors swore that something shook her awake, and when she opened up, it just kind of misted away. That was upstairs. Now the craft house is burnt now, and there at one time was supposed to be some wooden coffins under the old stage area. Well, that would make sense if that had been a TB clinic, that people were dying in the coffins. Somebody made them. But me and Becky Davis, we took that little door off the stage and looked, and we saw probably like for a baby, and they may have stored more coffins in there. And we couldn't figure out, really didn't want to crawl back under there on that dirt and stuff. So we went down to the old kitchen. There's a pantry and a door there blocked by an ice machine at the time. Well, we squeezed around it and walked back in there and got to where we'd seen that coffin, and it wasn't there. We went back upstairs and looked, and it wasn't there. So, I mean, I saw that in my own two eyes. Now, I never saw nothing unusual in the craft house, and I used to be afraid to go up in the bell tower. Then I got used to going up there as I got older. That's when I was a little kid. And it was just peaceful. I could go up there, you know, and just sit and look out through the louvers and look down the valley and feel that breeze blow in and just think about all the good times I'd had there. But that's the only ones, Tootie and Mama that told those ghost stories. I did see a little coffin, and there were people that had died in the craft house, probably in the 30s or early 40s.
Growing up in Cosby, you know, especially in the 80s and early 90s, there wasn't always a lot to do for a kid. And so for me, I was always involved in sports. I played baseball and football from the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, and later basketball, and those things kept me busy. But, you know, as a kid, again, it was a community center, and Sunset Gap offered activities that would keep a kid busy really all the year round. So I'm just thinking about some of the activities that they did throughout the year that were really, I mean, just I spent so much time there, and you could start with, you know, in the spring, obviously around Easter there was always going to be an Easter egg hunt and games at Easter, and that was such a big thing, especially when I was a younger kid, and that was a lot of fun. During the summertime, a lot of times they had 4th of July celebrations, but more distinctively I remember Vacation Bible School and summer camp. They would have a week of each when I was a kid. They had work camp groups that came in, usually from up north, and so there would be one group that would do the Vacation Bible School. A lot of times that was a group from the same place year after year, and then groups would come in and do a summer camp as well, and so that would be like 2 whole weeks of my summer vacation that I spent up there just going to those, and a lot of times that would be other cousins of mine that I would be there with, or friends, and it was just a lot of fun for me as a kid in the summertime. In the fall, I remember having Halloween celebrations up there. That was the big thing, you know. We're out here in the country. And so trick-or-treating, you know, if I wanted to go trick-or-treating as a kid, there might be 4 or 5 houses that my parents or my grandparents would feel good about taking me to, so it wasn't like a big neighborhood like in a city. So Sunset Gap, which my mom always had a lot to do with, had a big Halloween celebration every year. And it was neat. They would have a costume judging contest, and they would have games. It was family friendly, you know, and you know, not scary, but they had a hayride sometimes and stuff like that. I really enjoyed those Halloween celebrations. I remember those fondly, going to those year after year. I think the last time I went was the fall of maybe my 8th grade year, you know, before I got too old to do that. I can remember me and my cousin had like a kind of matching costumes and going to that. That was a lot of fun. They had dances. They had country dances where they had bands that played and dancing and things like that. I remember going to those. And then Christmas dinners around Christmas. I can remember going to those, and the center was always decorated so nice and everything. Another thing that I did there at the community center, which was year-round, was Boy Scouts. I didn't go as far into, my dad, Duran, was an Eagle Scout, and his scouting was centered around the community center as well. I didn't go as far because as I got older, I got more involved in sports. But I did Cub Scouts and a little bit of Boy Scouts there at the community center. Used to love going to just sit in the library and read. They had the library upstairs, and I always liked to read. I still do, and I would go up there and sit for hours and find a new book and read some if I didn't have anything else to do. Also, for a while, when I was, I guess probably like in middle school age, I think maybe 5th, 6th, 7th grade, around then, maybe in 8th grade, I think I did 3 or 4 years. My Aunt Karen, Glafenhein, I used to go do karate lessons with her. One fall, we actually had a kind of a karate weekend up there. So the class that we did, they used the old dormitory up there, and we had kind of a getaway where we ran and we worked for 2 days. Got to sleep up there at the old dorm, and I could remember that. It was kind of, if I remember it correctly, it was kind of in the fall of the year, so it was kind of cool out. But I slept right next to the chimney there in the old dorm, and everybody had always said that old dorm was haunted, and I was still in middle school, so I was kind of worried about that. I thought I might see a ghost. I might not sleep well. But I think after I had been doing my karate lessons and activities all day, and been outside, all that fresh air, I was wore out. And so I got into my bed there beside the chimney, and it was nice and warm. And I don't think I'd ever slept so good in my life. So no ghosts, just great sleep. And so many good memories from my time there. And all those activities that I got to do, really, like I said, it was really special because the community center, everybody there, the directors, and my grandmother and my mother, everybody that had anything to do with it, and those work camp groups that came in from different places, they worked so hard to make sure that kids had good, fun, safe things to do year round. And I was really blessed to get to be a part of that. I think the way that I got to grow up was really special. I think, it was definitely more similar to how my dad grew up, and the same thing, and it's before the advent. We didn't have cable TV, we didn't have cell phones, internet until later on, and so it was nice to have things to do and get to go do that. And of course, a lot of it was had to do with church, religious celebrations, and like I said, it was always family friendly, and it was a place that you knew you were safe, but you also had a great time. And I really look back and remember that time in my childhood very fondly.